This man had a crazy theory. Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop believed ancient Egyptians were not the same as modern Egyptians. No, he believed the pharaohs were black. But how to prove it? First, Diop tried pointing to the ancient Egyptians and their legends, the origin stories they recorded in their hieroglyphic texts such as the Edfu texts, and how those legends pointed up the Nile River, further south into Africa. Diop also studied the history of the Egyptians and discovered how their first kings came not from the Levant or the Middle East, but from deeper within Africa, from Upper Egypt and beyond. But he didn't stop there. Diop pointed to ancient Egyptian art, which mostly depicted black Africans dressing, working, dancing, worshipping the way Africans did in the past and still do today. All well and good. But for the experts Diop was trying to convince, even this seemingly strong anthropological evidence was not enough. So Diop went for broke. He demanded that the pharaohs speak for themselves. Diop asked the Egyptian authorities to give him the mummies in their possession so that he could test them for genotype, melanin levels, and carry out osteological bone structure studies. Surely this would end all doubt. Except Diop had a problem. The Egyptian authorities, who regularly loaned, even sold their artifacts to museums in Paris, London, and New York, refused to give this black Senegalese upstart their mummies. For 2 years past, bemoaned Diop at the time, I have been vainly begging the curator of the Cairo Museum for similar samples to analyze. No more than a few square millimeters of skin would be required. A doctor of nuclear physics and of history, had Cheikh Anta Diop reached his limits? Not quite, because Dr. Yves Chamla, head of anthropology at the Muséum del Homme in Paris, came to Diop's aid just at the right time. In 1971, she provided Diop with samples from ancient Egyptian mummies, just the samples he needed. Quickly, a grateful Diop went to work. His results were published and exhibited in 1974 before the UNESCO Symposium in Cairo on the peopling of ancient Egypt. Diop's tests, which he undertook with the help of other interested scientists, quote, undoubtedly classified ancient Egyptians among Africans of black Africa. Game, set, match? No. Offering no scientific retorts to his work, Diop's detractors simply added an editorial to the published findings of the 74 symposium. It was short, but far from sweet. It read, "The arguments put forward have not been accepted by all the experts interested in the problem." Coming, no doubt, from the strong Arab delegation, those words spelled the doom of Diop and others' tireless efforts. In the years to come, Diop's work was airbrushed from history by a conspiracy of omerta, a mafia-like code of silence. Until a decade later, when in 1983 Oxford Doctor of Egyptology and Cambridge Research Fellow Gay Robbins published a groundbreaking work looking into the bone structure of ancient Egyptian pharaohs by studying their mummies. Robbins wanted to know what ethnicity the ancient Egyptians most likely resembled biologically. In order to do this, she would have to measure the body plans and proportions of various mummies, from peasants to pharaohs, against modern populations. Robbins used this, Trotter and Glesser's 1952 estimation of stature from long bones of American whites and Negroes, published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. Utilizing this seminal study, Robbins came to one of the most disastrous results for the Egyptology cartel. It's better to show you exactly what she found than tell you or paraphrase. In the Journal of Human Evolution, under the title The Physical Proportions and Stature of New Kingdom Pharaohs, Robbins wrote this, quote, "It can be seen that all the pharaonic values, including those of Shmak-Hare, lie much closer to the Negro curve than to the white curve." Robbins' 1983 study went on to coin a never-before-heard term for the body proportions of the Egyptian pharaohs she was studying: super-negroid. That bears repeating, super-negroid. She said the pharaohs had super-negroid body features. But the shocks don't stop there. Robbins concluded, quote, Estimates of living stature based on X-ray measurements applied to the Trotter and Glesser 1958 Negro equations for the femur, tibia and humerus have been made for ancient Egyptian kings belonging to the 18th and 19th dynasties. It is shown that the limbs of the pharaohs, like those of other ancient Egyptians, had negroid characteristics, in that the distal segments were relatively long in comparison with the proximal segments." End quote. But the shocks kept coming. Almost as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, Robbins conducted another similar study in 1986. In her work, Predynastic Egyptian Stature and Physical Proportions, Robbins concluded the following, quote, "More consistent results are obtained from ancient Egyptian male skeletons if Trotter and Glesser formula for Negroes are used, rather than those for whites, which have always been applied in the past. Their physical proportions were more like modern Negroes than those of modern whites. If ancient Egyptian males had what may be termed Negroid proportions, it seems reasonable that females did likewise." This conclusion is all the more amazing when you consider that the Trotter and Glesser yardstick Robbins used as a gauge was based on a population of African Americans, meaning it would appear after all, they was kings. But here's the thing, if you read the introduction to the Robbins study, you can tell she didn't want to accept the implications of her findings. Inexplicably, without any explanation, she casually opens her report with the following statement. See if you can spot the cognitive dissonance yourself. Quote, "It has been recognized by Warren and others that the physical proportions of ancient Egyptians had Negroid affinities. Nevertheless, since they were certainly not Negroes, the use of Negro equations to estimate their stature has generally been avoided." Wait, what? Since they were certainly not Negroes? Robbins offers no evidence for this assertion, she just makes it, proving the endemic, well-embedded prejudice in Egyptology that this man was up against all along. 10 years on from 86, Sonia Zakrzewski's findings in a 1996 paper went on to agree with Robbins, stating that, quote, "Egyptians had the super Negroid body plan as described by Robbins." Now ask yourself, why haven't you heard of these studies? The answer is short and still not sweet. Pride and prejudice. Egyptology is stuck in a culture of saving face at all costs, having been founded on historical racist assumptions and notions about Black Africa. It's the same reason you hear of thoroughly debunked genetic studies every few years claiming to prove that the Egyptians had Near Eastern and European affinities before you'll ever hear of Diop's, Robbins and Zakrzewski's studies. What these half-baked genetic studies don't make readily clear to their dupes is that the sample size of mummies used are regularly selected from across a very narrow band of time and space. Imagine trying to ascertain the predominant race of the founders of modern America and pulling your sample size from an Irish immigrant graveyard in Boston during the late 1800s, and then concluding based on that all Americans throughout time were of Irish stock. Or imagine using studies based on haplotype DNA analysis and concluding based on these studies that the ancient Egyptians were identical to most Europeans and Near Eastern people, without mentioning the fact that the same haplotypes can also be found in Central Africa. Besides this, better, more accurate genetic studies based on genotyping are available, the kind that will tell you specifically the genetic makeup and the likely ethnicity of the predominant population in ancient Egypt. And yet, as others have pointed out, these studies are never carried out. Why? Simply put, because the answers they would throw up are too problematic for the cartel that runs Egyptology. But happily, not all scientists and Egyptologists are part of this cartel. Thanks to the work of many like Sally Ann Ashton, Rebecca Futo Kennedy, Stuart Tyson Smith, David Wengro, Soy Keita, and Christopher Ehret, the truth, like a great river, you might say like the Nile, is bursting the dam of lies. In 2023, the latter of the names just cited, Dr. Christopher Ehret, said this about the Naqada civilization, that is, the civilization which birthed ancient Egypt. Major burial sites of those founding locales of ancient Egypt in the 4th millennium BCE, notably El Badari as well as Naqada, show no demographic indebtedness to the Levant. They reveal instead a population with cranial and dental features with closest parallels to those of other long-time populations of the surrounding areas of northeastern Africa, such as Nubia and the northern Horn of Africa. So it would seem that Dr. Diop was right all along. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Right now we are at the fighting stage, with Hollywood pulling stunts like a Cleopatra docudrama nobody asked for. Stunts that suit the detractors just perfectly, as they can conveniently jump on a bandwagon that decries the straw-men proponents of a black Cleopatra as ignorant rubes. But they are fighting a losing battle, because like this researcher painfully found out, until modern Egyptology comes clean and abandons its denial, the experts will continue to be stunned by what they find the deeper they dig into the sands. Join us, like, subscribe, and rep the culture with us at Trill Black, where we don't run from the truth, we shout it from the rooftops. From Kush to Compton, no doubt.